A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to some more HJN Superfoam Flying. And what I got currently at the moment right here is basically yet another big pick that came out of the rival line. And at the same time, a lot of people at the time thought that it would be the end of that lineup. Specifically with the arrival of Project Hyper. The Keen blasters such as the Rush 40 right here, which I've already talked a bit about earlier in Superfoam Flying. So be sure to check out that review if you want to. But otherwise, let's get on going with basically what people thought was the very, very, very last release of the rival line as we know it. This right here is simply referred to as the Helix. I really gotta say all this again, don't I? If it's not broken, do not fix it. It was great to have Mythology blended into Nerf with the Rivals line beginning back in 2015, and well, today we see it as a whole lot more than just what it originally was. And then of course the Keen blasters came in. Again, check out the review on the Rush 40 over here, but let's not forget that this is a rival blaster. Why give it a name that would have been more appropriate for something like an Elite or a Mega Blaster or something like that? Seriously. Like, I feel burned out already. Overwhelmingly burned out. Just by seeing all of these blasters that have been incorrectly trademarked and named. It's so confusing nowadays. Like, that's just crazy. Who would do something like that? Well, anyways, the Tyche, as I've been able to rename it, I tell you, I've been able to find so much of Mythology not yet trademarked into the Rivals line. And you know what? Considering how many blasters there are right now that have not been named the right way, I've been able to dig up a lot of research and I've been able to find tons of name suggestions out there. And there are still tons that have not already been used. So if the Rivals line is, in fact, still rolling on, then just please. It doesn't matter if you milk Mythology dry. Just take the names while you can. Give a great opportunity and just take them. I don't care what it is or how it is. Well, yeah. The Tyche here, people thought that this was the last ever straw for the rival line before the Keen blasters took over. But in this particular case, many people thought that this lineup would go out with a bang with something like this. A shotgun-style blaster that utilizes a nice sort of, well, dual hopper system, as you can see, where you can fit a lot of HIR rounds or high-impact rounds into this thing, and then basically, well, huh? Ah, there we go. Well, you know what? That kind of brings me to when I found this. Basically, a little windmill looking thing that, essentially speaking, loads around into the chamber. Huh. Why is it misfiring like that? I don't really know. Yeah, that's just weird. Okay, I feel like I get it now. You gotta basically hold it back and tilt it forward so the rounds come sliding into the windmill, and then just push it forward, and then, well, okay, no rounds in the chamber as you can see. And, well, yeah, it's now empty again. Yeah, so you basically got to hold it down the way I see it, and then it should load right into the chamber itself. I mean, this windmill portion is kind of, well, doing something that's sort of preventing some of them from getting into the chamber easily. But let's also not forget about the curve shot specific sort of function, which is to, well, curve the barrel to the left or right, to change the angulation. Try it this way. Well, I guess it's not really making too big of a difference the way I see it. Especially because I'm in a more confined space. That seems to be what's affecting it the most. And I'm sure that many of you might actually see this as well. But for my particular Tyche, I feel like that this is not really... It's probably not functioning all too well. It's probably just a little ways behind what probably would have been optimal levels for a blaster. But when you consider something like this that had pretty much been sent out, this was in fact the more recent side of Rival at the time. This plus the Cronus, which I have up here, I've talked about this one before. This one also had a couple of problems with it as well, where, well, it's still functioning correctly, but during the first couple of hours of use, this thing would not lock into place like so. Instead, it would kind of just shift right back up as if the locking portion of it would not engage correctly. But the way I see it, it seems to be doing all right now. As I've said many times over, a lot of this stuff is pre-recorded. A lot of this footage that I have spans between 2021 and 2023, for the most part. And then, of course, we also can't forget the fact that sometimes I'm seeing a lot of new things take place within all of this as well. And as a result of that, I'm not necessarily going to see a whole lot of other things happen. Maybe something will change, maybe some things will not change at all. And I'm not too sure about the whole thing itself, but for the Rival Curve Shot Tyche, yeah, this is probably yet another subject where improvements probably could have been made, especially if it was done properly. And yeah, for the record, there's no slam fire in this thing. Not necessarily a satisfying thing to hear about, but hey, you know what? I'd say for what was at the time declared to be the last ever entry into the Rival series, it's certainly quite... I don't really know. It's not a satisfying blaster. It's not really a great blaster. For something that was $31 at Target that I bought at the time, utilizing the same old techniques including hoppers, pumps, trigger fire, and then of course safety switch, the Tyche probably is not really the greatest pick that you could have gotten from the Rival series. Even back then, I mean, the Rival series sure did not necessarily start off on the wrong foot, but at the same time, a lot of people declared it to be the last blaster, and the Tyche doesn't necessarily seem to make the series end on the right foot. But in a way, that probably just goes to show that maybe not all lineups from Nerf itself are meant to be around for much longer. And being that it had already been 6 years since the lineup had started, with the Tyche closing off the lineup itself before, well, eventually it started to make a few comebacks every now and then up until this very point. But again, there's really not a whole lot that we can probably expect from the future of Rival, especially if Hasbro is going to continue doing a lot of things differently with the lineup as it is now. And then, of course, we got to remember that the first few blasters of the Keen series were also not necessarily at the top level of coordination, design, and functionality by any means. Because when I've talked about the Rush 40 being the first of its kind that I was able to pick up, the utilization of these nice sort of, well, these kinds of rounds right here in comparison to the Rival HIR rounds, of course they do seem to be very different in like ways. These are much smaller, made of a more silicone sort of rubber in a way. These ones, of course, are larger in size, therefore easier to find most of the time, and given a nice sort of, well, fluorescent color as well. Though this one's a little more glossy, the way I see it, and this one tends to be almost in like a matte sort of finish, the way I see it. But being that this started to come in, thereby making this practically obsolete almost overnight, when these first started coming around, it sort of begs the question, Which of the two would you rather have? Would you rather have Keen, or would you rather have Rival? One's been around longer than the other. And again, there's really a lot of contextual evidence out there to back up a lot of people's claims about how this series is not necessarily doing much better. But you know what though? This was the last ever Rival Blaster that came out at the time. And you know what? Since then, I've seen a few comebacks here. Even though this is pre-recorded footage, we have actually gotten ourselves a few announcements about some more Rival Blasters coming around. So, like I said, they supposedly thought that this was the last ever Rival Blaster ever made. But, well, again, you probably can't keep a good lineup down. So, if I were to give this thing a score, for a nice capacity, a pretty big hopper, a nice sort of, well, typical pump system, I can't necessarily point my finger at a lot of things, because this was, at the time, the last of the series itself, and the last Rivals Blaster in general. But because of a few things, a windmill function that loads the rounds into the chamber like a windmill, with a jam door that you can access through it, a curving barrel, and then of course a rather generous hopper in a way for something like this, it kind of comes down to probably a scoring of 7.0 out of 10. So I'm not all in for this thing, but this thing is also not really at the top of the line. I'm not really all in it to win it here. But it's not really the best that they could have possibly released before it was pretty much all over and done with. But you know what though? I will say, at least for a Rival Blaster, it does what it does best. Fires HIR rounds like it's nobody's business. And with that in mind, that probably concludes a big part of the Rival lineup itself. But believe it or not, there are a bunch of other Rivals Blasters that I'm hoping to talk about, and many of which came before the Tyche. So be sure to stick around for that, and I'm hoping to keep the Rival series alive here on the channel for a while to come. And if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.